Okay. All right, so let me try sharing my screen here. I'm just going to try sharing the desktop. All right, so far so good. And let me hide that. Okay, so let me start out, if I can have your attention. Let me start out with some warnings. Got three big warnings. Number one is trying to address this weird issue that we ran into when I first introduced Horos, where I found that it was cropping images very strangely when I would export a JPEG. So I'd have an image on screen, I'd say export JPEG from the file menu, and it would give me just like one little corner of the image. It would crop off most of the image. And strangely, the solution that I found to that was to have your Cintiq set up as an extended display, move the image window, the 3D reconstruction window onto the Cintiq, and then export JPEG, okay? That seemed to fix the problem. I have no idea why, but it seemed to work. I've been playing around with this animation tool. In fact, I tested it last week while most of you were working on your anatomy projects, and found that the same thing happens with the animation tool. If you have the animation window on your main screen, it crops off 90% of the image, and it only gives you one little corner of the image. But if you have your Cintiq set up as an extended display and move that animation window over to the Cintiq, then it'll work correctly. Now the problem with that is that I want to, number one, try to show this to you on the projector. So I have to do some other weirdness with my computer. I've actually got my Cintiq set up as my main display, and I'm having my Mac monitor and the projector mirror the Cintiq. We'll see if that works. And hopefully, hopefully Zoom is actually capturing all of this right now. Okay, so I think for all of you, it's a simple matter of going to the Apple menu, to the system settings, choosing displays. You want to set the Dell display as your main display. Click on the Cintiq, set that, use as, you'll set it here. It doesn't give me the option because I'm doing weird stuff with mine, but you'd set the Cintiq, or you set your Cintiq as an extended display. And then when I show you the animation window, you'll actually have to drag the animation window over to the Cintiq, and I'm pretty sure that'll work. All right, so here we are in Horos, and I've just dragged one of the sample data sets in here just to demonstrate the animation process. I said I had three warnings for you, right? So number one is just this weirdness with setting your display and having the Cintiq as an extended display. Warning number two, go to the Horos menu once you've got Horos open. Of course, you may not have a data set yet. You may have to go retrieve one from the course share. But once you have Horos open, you want to go to the settings, click the little 3D skull man here, and make sure that button is turned off that says auto rotate objects after 3 minutes. Remember that one? Now, fortunately, Horos seems to remember the fact that I turned it off last time. So hopefully when all of you open yours, hopefully that will also already be turned off. But make sure you double check that, because if you leave that on and your anatomy starts spinning around in the midst of your animation, it just screws up the whole thing and you got to start over again. So that's warning number 2. Turn off the auto 3D rotation. Final warning, number 3. I think this might be on your assignment sheet, but just in case. When we animate, we're going to animate zooming in, zooming out, moving left, right, up, down. You can combine zooming and moving to create almost a fly-through. We're going to use the crop tool. We're going to animate that so you can actually see gradually cropping part of the body and then uncropping part of the body. And we're going to animate changes in transparency using that window level tool, a little tool that looks like a little grayscale, just square. However, here's the warning. Do not use the custom color lookup table editor at any point in this process. So, I mean, we'll get there in a minute. You want to make sure that you don't use. Remember, there's a thing. There's like an 8-bit button, and a 16-bit button, and it says CLUT editor, CLUT editor. Just don't click that. The reason being is that if you try to animate a change in transparency, in other words, if you start out with your anatomy with all the skin on, and then you gradually change the transparency to make the skin and the muscle transparent, you can actually animate that, right? So that'll be a transition in your animation. But once you click on that color lookup table editor, it applies that to every frame in your animation. So it never actually lets you change transparency. Okay. So, all right. So hopefully you understand the warnings there. So I don't know what that's all about. All right. So like I say, I've got one data set dragged in here. Click my 2D viewer. Actually, let me go back. I got to make sure that there may be multiple studies in here. Right. I want the one with lots of images. So now click my 2D viewer. And now I'm going to click 3D volume rendering. You can animate surface renderings, but the only thing you can do with a surface rendering is zoom in and zoom out and move around. You can't crop in the surface rendering. You can't change transparency in the surface rendering. So we're not going to animate surface renderings. We're only going to animate volume renderings. So I'm going to go to a 3D volume rendering. And right, so here's the body. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resize the window, because when I animate this, it's just like when you export a JPEG, it's going to give you the entire width of that big black window, right? There's just going to be lots and lots of excess black space off to the sides that we don't really need. So by simply dragging the window smaller so it's closer to a square, I've sort of cropped in on my anatomy here. I'm going to go to the 3D viewer menu. There's actually a command down here. I can put this in the coronal view, which means we're looking straight at the front of the body. So there's my coronal view. I'm going to scale it up a little bit so it fills more of the window. And I'm going to go to my window level tool, and I'm going to drag this in such a way as to put all of his skin on. So this is going to be my starting point for my animation. All right, so how do we actually animate something? So the only downside to scaling the window down is that you lose a lot of the buttons and things that are in the top menu. But if you click on these two little triangles over here on the right, we can see all of the other options that would normally appear as buttons at the top of this window. Now you might think that we want to choose a button called Movie Export. You don't. Movie Export only lets you export a turntable animation. Basically, what it's going to do is it's just going to rotate the body around the Z-axis or the Y-axis. And that's it. That's the extent of your movie. We actually want this very last option called fly-through. That's going to bring up a little window that looks like this. Now, this is the point where you're probably going to want to move your 3D reconstruction here and probably move the fly-through window itself over onto your Cintiq as an extended menu, or as an extended display, I should say. Okay, I'm going to hope that I don't have to do that so that you can actually see what I'm doing for the demo, and hope that it actually shows up on screen, and hopefully it also shows up in the Zoom recording. I'll know very quickly if this is going to work on my end. So basically what we're going to do to create a movie is we're going to use that fly-through window. And if you look at the bottom left corner of it, you see there's a plus sign. When I click that plus sign, it takes a snapshot of what I see on screen and turns it into a keyframe. And then I can move the body, scale the body, crop the body, change transparency, any of those things, or any combination of those things, and then simply click the plus sign again, and it makes another keyframe. And I just keep doing that. I keep moving the body, rotating the body, doing all kinds of things, and clicking new keyframes. So, like I said, I oriented the body in the coronal plane, so we're looking straight at the front. I put all this skin back on, so that's going to be my starting point. So in my fly-through window, I'm going to click the plus sign, and like I said, I will know immediately if my display settings are going to work correctly. Hey, they do. So when I click the plus sign, it gives you a little thumbnail of that keyframe. And I'm happy because when I look at that little keyframe, I see the whole body. You may have a hard time seeing it from where you are, but it's a little snapshot of the whole anatomy window there. So now I might want to do just a simple turntable kind of animation, at least to start with. I'm going to simply rotate him around the vertical axis to start, just to kind of, in my animation, just to kind of show people like, hey, here's this body in 3D. So I've started out with him in the coronal view, so we're seeing him from an anterior view. I can go up to that 3D viewer menu again, and I can say, let's look at him from a left sagittal view, which means looking at him on his left side. So it's rotated him 90 degrees from an anterior view to a left lateral view. I can click another keyframe. Now, the problem at this point is I want to keep rotating him around 360 degrees. There's no button to look at him from the back. So to rotate him so I can see him from the back, I actually have to use that three-dimensional rotate tool and just very carefully drag him so we see him from behind. And I'm realizing now I probably should have gotten rid of that thing that he's sitting on, but I'm not going to worry about that now. I could have used the scissor tool to try to crop that off, but so I'm looking at this guy from behind. Now I'm going to click a third keyframe by just clicking the plus sign. Now I can go to the 3D viewer menu, and now I can choose right sagittal view, which is going to give me a perfect lateral view from his right side. Click a fourth keyframe. Then I can go back to coronal view. So he's facing front, click a fifth keyframe. So I've now created 5 keyframes that basically just rotates him 360 degrees around a vertical axis. That's no fun. Now we're going to try something a little different. So now I can go to my window level tool. This is the one that changes transparency. And I can start dragging that to remove his skin and show his muscles. And I can do this in a series of multiple steps if I want to do it gradually. So I could actually create multiple keyframes in the process of making him transparent. So click a keyframe here, go back to my window level tool, drag some more, make him a little more transparent, make another keyframe, drag some more. It all depends on what it is I want to look at. This guy's got a nice big golf ball sized aneurysm, and it's got 2 aneurysms, one in each common iliac artery. So make another keyframe for that. And now, maybe I'd like to zoom in on those aneurysms. So we can take our magnifying glass tool and scale. And we can also do this gradually, where we use a couple keyframes to gradually scale into this area. I could also take the arrow tool, the translate tool, and start to move him down a little bit. So we're simultaneously zooming in and magnifying a little bit. Add another keyframe. And then just for kicks, maybe what we'll do is we'll actually rotate him back a little bit. And zoom in. So we can get right in on those aneurysms. Make another keyframe. Rotate him back a little more. Zoom in a little more. I can actually fly up the vertebral column a little bit, or right up the aorta a little. But I'm not going to take the time in this demo to do that too much. I'm actually going to start tilting it back into sort of normal anatomic position and zoom out a little bit. Now that I've zoomed in on the aneurysms, I'm going to zoom back out and do this gradually over a couple of keyframes. Tilt him back a little more. Zoom out a little bit more. A keyframe. And then finally tilt him back pretty much into anatomic position. Zoom back out some more. And then some other things I want to do, and these are going to be requirements for your movie. I want you to also crop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put some of his soft tissue back on with that window level tool. Do that over a series of a couple of keyframes. Probably need to zoom out a little bit more just so that I'll be able to see the crop tool. In fact, if I want to get a perfect anterior view, I can just go back to my coronal view setting. Pick a keyframe. And now I'm gonna try to crop in on them. Hopefully the crop tool is gonna be visible when I turn it on. If I can get that silly zoom thing out of the way. I don't know if you, yeah, that window. All right, here we go. So again, I don't see the crop tool. I don't see the little box with the green tennis balls on it, but I can access the crop tool from this little menu here. Okay, that's good. So I can definitely see the crop tool. Let's try this. All right, so I'm gonna crop in from his left side. We'll do that over the course of a couple of keyframes. Maybe crop right. Oh, shoot. That's not what I wanted. Stop. It's so annoying. Gosh. Come on, click on the little green ball. All right. Unfortunately, I know something that's going to happen when I export this movie. All these little movements that I'm making, even though I haven't clicked any keyframes, it remembers them.
Oh.
And it's gonna, so my body's gonna kind of rock back and forth for a while before it actually crops it. So maybe it would help if I turned him a little. Maybe this will allow me to get hold of the tennis ball a little better. No, come on. It's just rotating the thing. It's really frustrating. I swear you used to be able to select just the move tool, and when you turned on crop, it didn't automatically jump to that 3D cube.
No, you're not.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
all right. There we go. So I'm going to crop in. Say I'm doing that gradually over a course of a couple of keyframes. Yeah. Question. Right.
Okay. Just wondering.
And so I'm going to crop right into the mid-sagittal plane, more or less. It's rotated a little bit, but now I'm going to turn off the crop thing. And now that I've got him cropped, now we'll continue to rotate a little bit so we can actually zoom into that cropped surface. So I'm going to zoom in, rotate a little bit more, just making more keyframes. Zoom in, move them over a little bit. Maybe I'll play with the window level a little bit more and see if we can actually make heads or tails of some of the stuff that's down here in the lower abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. And of course, it's probably going to animate this too. Well, let's just go ahead and make it partly transparent again. Uh-oh, where'd my window go? Gradually make that all those soft tissues transparent again. So now we've got like a mid-sagittal section, and we can see one of those aneurysms over there on the right side in the right internal iliac. So I can zoom in on that. So what I want from each of you is just a, combination of animating motion, rotation, zooming in, zooming out, changing transparency, maybe a couple different times, and then cropping. Okay, so zoomed in on that. I'm going to start to zoom back out, maybe rotate him back into anatomic position gradually as I rotate or as I zoom back out. Maybe start to undo the crop also at the same time. Yeah,
Remembers all the movements you make.
yeah.
All of the gradient movements you make. Like if you went too far in one direction, then you go back and keyframe it where you want it to be. Is it
There's-
gonna, like,
There's a good chance it'll remember
Oh.
some of that.
that's unfortunate.
Plus, I mean, the animation tools in Horos are really bad. For that reason and other reasons. It also does things like just, you get all this weird flickering where objects just disappear briefly for a couple frames and then come back. So it's definitely not a high-end animation tool, but it has the advantage of being able to animate directly from an actual person's anatomy. So probably the one group of people that use this most would be people in medical legal, where they want a movie from, one particular person's anatomy. No, I haven't.
It's like, what if you got-
I know there are companies that do medical legal that do this.
Okay.
And have been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
I tried to pitch it to one of my clients once, and they weren't that impressed. Yeah.
I'm curious, thank you.
Right, so I've used that the coronal view setting to get it back into coronal view. I'm simply adding some of the soft tissue back on with the window level tool back to full skin. So I've created a total of 33 frames here. It's really hard to go in and edit a frame. Like if I went in there, theoretically, I could click on any frame and hit the minus sign and it would delete that keyframe. But it might then give you some kind of really weird transition from the remaining keyframes. One thing that you can do with Horos, I used to think literally for years, I used to think that if you wanted to do an animation in Horos, one of these movies, you had to do it all in one sitting because there was no way to save your progress and go back to it. But I found out I'm wrong about that. In the fly-through window, there is a button down here to export. And you can actually export Osiris fly-through and it saves it as an XML document on your computer. And then at any other point, you could come back, reopen. You would have to have this 3D data set available, but you could open the fly-through window and click import and select that XML file, bring it back in, and at very least what it would do is it would save all of the keyframes that you had created up to that point. But let me show you now how you finish this up. So, like I say, I've created 33 keyframes. In the fly through window, I'm going to click the button up here at the top that says movie. And it's going to ask me how many frames do I want total. Well, I've got 33 keyframes, call it 32, close enough. If I were to render a movie with 50 frames, that means, typically when you export these things, at a minimum, you're going to export them at like 12 frames per second. So 50 frames would be a 4-second movie. Everything I just did would go, in 4 seconds, right? So the only way to make the movie longer and slower is to simply add lots more frames. Actually, if I were to produce something for a medical legal client, I probably wouldn't do it at 12 frames per second because that's really bad. That's considered really low frame rate. For broadcast media, it's like 24 to 30 frames per second is considered typical. I don't know if you guys have gotten into that with animation yet, but I'm sure you'll talk about that at some point about frame rate. So I think 24 to 30 is typical for like any kind of broadcast medium or anything like that. So if I exported something at 24 frames per second and only had 50 frames in it, the whole thing I just created would flash by in a matter of 2 seconds. Brianna, you had your hand up.
So the part side that she said that 360 frames, does that mean we have to set 360?
No. So you can set some much more reasonable number of keyframes, like what I just did. 32, 36, 25, 4, somewhere in that ballpark. But when I say create a movie that has, and actually it's a minimum of 360, you can make more if you want. What Horos will do, which is what really any animation program would do, is it simply fills in the missing frames. It calculates those frames, from starting at point A going to point B. It calculates as many frames as it needs intermediate between.
So does that mean there needs to be like a number of rich?
No, I mean, you could do something as boring as literally just have the body rotate around 360 degrees. You could do that at 360 frames and at 12 frames per second. That means you would have a 3-minute long movie of him just rotating around 360 degrees. So I can't give you like any more specific rule of thumb than that, but just if you make a movie that has a lot of keyframes, you want a lot of frames so that there's frames in between, a large number of frames between each keyframe. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Hopefully, yeah.
How
Sorry?
many are you gonna put for this?
I'm sorry?
How many frames are you gonna put? Like what ballpark?
So, since I had 33, I think I said, if I only did 360 frames, that'd mean there's only like, 10 or a little more than 10 frames between each keyframe. Means my whole movie at 12 frames per second would be, because of 30 seconds. I'll probably do a little bit more than that, 400 or a little more, 420, something like that.
So then how many frames total?
I had 33
Okay.
keyframes.
So you're doing around that for 30-ish frames.
Yeah. So I put in the number of frames, leave the method spline, that's fine. Then I'm going to click the compute button. And now here's where I can actually preview the movie before I really export it. Is I can click the play button. And you'll see how it's actually calculating those intermediate frames. And I want to see where it gets wonky here, if it gets really weird or not. My sacrum disappeared briefly for no reason.
That's interesting.
They do that. And not too bad. Oh, here's my cropping. Actually, didn't mess up the cropping too badly. Yeah, I hit compute and then I hit, there's a play button here where it's simply previewing. And you don't actually have to preview the whole thing, but it's probably a good idea. And it's going to keep doing that over and over again until I hit stop.
Go slower as you just add more.
Right. Yep. Just add more frames and it slows down the movie.
And if you wanna go faster.
Right. You want it to go really, really zippy fast. You have fewer.
I did it before you said it at 50 frames to see what happened. It was so fast, it's crazy. It was just like, and then it was like.
Yep.
It's kind of awesome.
So then, once you're satisfied with it, you've got your correct number of frames that you want. You've kind of previewed it with the little play button. All this we leave the same. We're going to render it as a QuickTime movie, best quality rendering, current size. Just click save, and it'll save it as a QuickTime movie. That's what we want. But here's where you set your frame rate. It's kind of weird that it's like waits until you actually save it at the very end to set the frame rate. I think in the assignment, I tell you, I want you to do 12 images per second or frames per second. You could set that higher. Just realize if you do like a higher frame rate, it just means that your frames are going to go by faster. The animation might be smoother, but it'll be quicker. So, sorry.
The whole thing is slowing down.
That's right. The only way you could slow down certain parts is in the process of creating your keyframes. If you simply create more keyframes for a particular part that you want to be dragged out longer, that would make that part go slower. So what it's doing now is it's really rendering those individual frames and saving it to a QuickTime movie. It really doesn't take too long. It says estimated remaining time 14 seconds, so it's going to be done very quickly. Yeah, I want you to know how to do it. All right, so here's my final movie. Where'd it go? So I click play. He spins around and he gets transparent. He's wobbling a little bit, but not too bad. Zoom in on the aneurysms. Drop a little bit. That's that. Going to pause the recording for just a audio is back on. And share my screen. So I guess maybe I did this backwards, but I should show you some other examples just for inspiration. These are some student examples from the past. I forget which data set this is. Got a little port of some kind up there in the chest. So that's what happens when you rotate the cropping box. That's a nice one. Yeah.
From the ground up. Which is beautiful process.
All right, so there's one. This must use that, I don't know, this is the Incisix data set that's the teeth. Coronal plane there. Fly into the inside of the mouth. Kind of cool.
That goes crazy.
Here's another one. This is can I forget which data set this is, but there's one guy that has a transplanted kidney down in his pelvis.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was so confused by his kidney stone.
Yeah, that's where they put kidney transplants. They put them in your pelvis.
How did they get the other one out?
I don't think they don't usually bother taking the bad one out. They just leave it.
But in that, if you look at the can't process.
Well, yeah, it depends on what's wrong with it. Right. If it's necrotic tissue, then it can cause problems, but. Here's one. Now, you might notice the weird colors. You can choose from those default color lookup tables. So there's VR Muscle and Bone, and there's one called General Electric, and there's one called, I don't know, there's one called UCLA. So you can choose from those preset color lookup tables from the menu. Just don't click the color lookup table editor.
Oh, like, I understand. Oh, yeah, what happened? Why did you?
So what happens if you choose the color lookup table editor is it applies that to every frame in your movie. So even if you use the window level tool to change transparency, that gets overridden by whatever color lookup table setting you chose when you clicked on the editor. So you end up not being able to change transparency when you use the color lookup table editor. But you can, as you can see here, you can use one of those other weird preset color palettes.
You just can't make your own.
Right.
And when you use that, when you use the wave editor, it's called a window. You do the transparency. You
Yep.
do that color too that way.
Yeah. So let's watch this one again. It's kind of fun. This is the Mannix data set, which I know well. I don't know which color palette this is, but I'm sure you can find it easily enough. And let's see.
Whoa.
So that one must use a different color palette too. So all that purple.
Wait, so if you pick a. I thought if you pick something that was from one of the color lookup options,
Mhm.
then it wouldn't change for all of them. But it did for mine,
Really?
yeah.
Hmm.
Unless I did something weird and I like picked another one that did it, but I changed mine to the rainbow one at the end. Cause I wanted it to turn blue and then
Right.
turn them all blue.
That's the problem. It's going to apply whichever custom or whichever forget the word custom, whichever one of those
It will.
color
apply to
palettes,
all.
it's going to apply to every.
Got it.
Now, it'll let you change the transparency,
Okay, but
Right.
it won't let you, okay, okay.
but it won't let you change from, BR Muscle Bone to UCLA to General Electric to whatever in the course.
Well, now mine's blue. So. It's kind of.
Here's B's from last year.
Yes, you know those cheap roller coaster games, that's what I feel like.
Can we add audio to the video?
You can figure out how, that would be fun, but.
Probably just put it up, let's put it out of context. I'd be right back.
Okay. All right, last one. This uses the Felix data set, I think it is. Yeah, this is guy that has a cerebral aneurysm. Fly up into the head.
Yeah, because your event is wild.
You can see the aneurysm right there. Just for kicks, I'm just playing around with those, the preset color lookup tables here from this list. It might. It's very,
No way to avoid it.
it's very unpredictable.
Okay.
But it often does capture motions that you didn't mean to make and changes in transparency that you didn't mean to do. And even though you didn't necessarily click a keyframe for it, it somehow seems to remember some of those things that you do. Now, I'm not animating this one yet. I'm just playing with the color palettes just because they're fun. I haven't figured out why this one's called French. I can understand if it was maybe like, I don't know, the colors of the French flag, blue, white, red, something, but
Maybe this is just the French, how the French do, seasons.
you think maybe?
That's just what happens. Or it only works on French data sets. Let's the hat they wear? What's it called? Yeah, they have to have gray on it. Nah.
Ooh, I like that one. That one's called Hue 2.
I rested the wax on against the table my part and then it's fixed, so. It found. I think I'm on to something, musical medical illustrations. I think I'm on to something. Musical, yes. Oh my god. I gotta get that done.
I love singing, just. They did not look that. They played it. It's just like. Oh, that's- Shady. And that's where it gets really crazy. I think so.
I wanted a quick time.
So